If you look at the globe today, a stark divide seems obvious. On one side, wealthy, highly industrialized Western nations. On the other, parts of the Middle East struggling with instability and underdevelopment. A common assumption is that this divide is a direct result of religious doctrine. This idea has deep intellectual roots. In 1905, German sociologist Max Weber argued that Protestantism possessed a unique theological affinity for business enterprise. He posited that the fear of damnation led followers to seek signs of salvation through rigorous work, providing the cultural engine for modern industrial capitalism. But a look at the historical record suggests that using a 21st century snapshot to judge theology might be a misdiagnosis of how nations actually succeed. To find out, we can run a historical stress test. If we rewind the clock roughly 1,000 years, we find an era where the roles were the exact opposite. From the 8th to the 14th centuries, European Christian polities were defined by severe poverty, widespread illiteracy, a lack of basic sanitation, and relentless feudal subjugation. At the same time, the Islamic world was the global epicenter of urban development, scientific inquiry, and intercontinental trade. In Al-Andalus, the Islamic city of Córdoba featured 10 miles of completely paved, brilliantly lit streets. Stone bridges and complex aqueducts fed public baths and lush gardens centuries before European cities achieved even basic plumbing. Muslim merchants of this era pioneered advanced capitalist tools, including early paper credit systems and a commercial partnership model known as the mudaraba. These instruments eventually migrated to Italy, providing the framework for the European commercial revolution. Because Islamic governance oversaw a period of immense commercial and intellectual flourishing while Europe stagnated, religious doctrine fails as a predictor of state success. A nation's prosperity originates from the deliberate establishment of political and economic institutions and the development of its human capital. Even the wealth of early Protestant regions was an unintended byproduct of theology. It had nothing to do with a religiously driven compulsion to save. Instead, it was driven by Martin Luther's insistence that all followers must read the Bible for themselves. This theological mandate necessitated universal schooling, producing mass literacy. When researchers control for these literacy rates, the economic gap between Protestants and Catholics disappears entirely. This diagram shows the true catalyst for growth. The top trajectory represents inclusive institutions, enforcing property rights. The flatlining bottom trajectory represents extractive institutions concentrating wealth. Modern economic data shows that human capital and inclusive governance correlate with development, regardless of the local faith. So if Islam didn't cause the modern authoritarianism and economic stagnation seen in parts of the Middle East, what did? The primary architect of regional instability was arbitrary border drawing by European colonial powers after World War I. This is the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement. British and French diplomats carved up territories into spheres of influence. By trapping rival factions within artificial borders, colonial powers guaranteed a century of internal friction. Foreign political interventions also subverted organic democratic movements to protect economic interests. In 1953, the CIA and MI6 orchestrated a violent coup in Iran, removing a democratically elected prime minister to maintain control over the country's oil. That economic dependence is known as the resource curse. When autocrats are funded by centralized oil revenues instead of citizen taxation, the social contract breaks. The state no longer relies on the people's productivity, stripping the populace of their primary leverage to demand democratic accountability. The modern authoritarianism and poverty in parts of the Muslim world align with the predictable outcomes of resource extraction, artificial borders, and post-colonial institutional damage. Comparing the industrial West directly to the post-colonial Middle East relies on a selection bias that ignores the rest of the world. Consider Honduras, where roughly 95% of the population identifies as Christian. Despite this adherence to the faith, the nation has historically struggled with high levels of violent crime and institutional fragility. In sub-Saharan Africa, overwhelmingly Christian nations like the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Central African Republic rank at the bottom of global human development indices, devastated by civil war and extreme poverty. Conversely, Muslim-majority nations that have avoided major foreign intervention and managed their resources strategically show very different outcomes. Malaysia, a Muslim-majority democracy, has used strong economic institutions to achieve high human development scores and commercial stability, outperforming numerous Western nations on global indices. When analyzing the entire globe, religion fails as a predictor of a nation's standard of living or civic safety. The historical and empirical data shows that no single faith holds a monopoly on human progress or societal failure. Wealth and stability flourish where human capital is nurtured, inclusive institutions, history, economics, and geopolitics.